Hello, and welcome to the Confessions of a Christian Single Woman community, where you will be empowered to propel in all aspects of your purpose and no sister is left behind. Sit back and relax, grab your journal and pen, pour you a cup of coffee or tea, and go on this journey to self discovery and growth in the Lord. Hello, Purpose Propellers, and welcome back. I am excited that you are tuning in again today. And so, we are still in our series, our topic about overcoming loneliness. I'm alone, but not lonely. And so, as usual, I hope that you are really enjoying learning about the different causes and the types of loneliness and, the biblical examples that we can learn from and how to overcome it. It's very important for us to be able to recognize loneliness when it's creeping up on us so that we are not unaware of what to do when it happens, because we are human and there will be times where we may feel like we are lonely. So we want to make sure that when it does happen, we are fully equipped to know what to do. Amen. All right. So last week we talked about the cyclical nature of loneliness. And so today we're going to talk about the gender differences of loneliness. And I thought that this was an interesting topic because we always talk about loneliness from our perspective as women, but I also wanted to kind of dive in just a little bit, not much, but just a little bit about, how men may view loneliness. Of course, I can't speak for all men, and I'm not a man, so this is all research based. But I think it's important for us to remember that as we are, desiring to get into relationships. For those of you who are listening who are already in relationships, this may be something that you may not be aware of, and this could be a conversation starter between you and your man. Okay, so let's just go along with it and see what happens. All right, so research suggests that men and women may experience loneliness differently, which I do think we do because we are two totally different, species. Well, I don't want to say species, but we're two totally different humans, right? The way that a man thinks and operates is not the same way that a woman thinks and operates. So we want to make sure that we understand the correlation between both so that when we are blessed with our significant other, we know what to do and we'll recognize the patterns when we see them. Okay. So men may be less likely to seek social support or express their feelings openly. And then, women, we're quite the opposite, right? So we may be more than likely to seek emotional connections and social interactions as a means of coping with loneliness. And so we're going to look at the differences in between men and women today. So this may be a tidge bit longer than normal, but I'm going to try to keep it as short as I can while giving you all the information that I can. Okay, so let's talk it out. So for gender differences, they play a role, right, in how individuals experience and cope with loneliness. And so loneliness itself is a universal human experience, right? Men and women may end up perceiving or expressing and coping with loneliness different due to different things like societal expectations, which we've talked about before, any type of socialization processes, and gender roles also play into that as well. How you grew up, men typically are taught to, be a man, be strong, be a provider, and you gotta, go out and take care of your family. Like that's how they've been brought up. So that may be, or how some were brought up, and that may be the mentality that they have. Some may be more passive in nature where they're just like, hey, I'm just living life. Que sera, sera. It is what it is. Whatever will be, will be. And, I just kind of go along life that way. Where women, the societal expectations are, that typical like 50s wife, you are getting up early in the morning, you're cleaning, you're cooking, you're taking care of the kids. Or even for those of the women who work, you also have to get up, go to work, get the kids ready for school, go to work full time, come home, make dinner, do homework, do bath time, spend time with the kids, get the kids in the bed, and then you got to tend to your husband. So there are certain norms that are certain societal norms that are placed on both men and women. And so those things can affect how loneliness comes into play. Okay, so let's talk about socialization patterns first. And so the socialization patterns, they can dictate if it comes from the cultural norms, which we've talked about before. If it comes from gender roles, then it could dictate different types of behaviors and attitudes. And then that pattern, the socialization pattern, can shape how an individual sees themselves or perceives themselves and even others, and how they interact with the world, and how they navigate any of their social relationships, right? So however you move about in the world, your socialization pattern will show. Okay. And so just to give a few socialization patterns of men have more emphasis on masculinity, right? They are taught to conform to different norms of masculinity. They have to learn how to be tough and be manly. And they learn that not expressing vulnerability is a sign of or expressing their emotions is a sign of weakness. So expressing vulnerability and expressing emotions is a sign of weakness. That's often how many boys may be brought up, or men may be brought up. Okay. Also is an avoidance of vulnerability. So kind of like I said, they're taught to avoid seeking help or support when needed, and to prioritize relying only on themselves or their own independence, because being vulnerable is not considered manly, right? And then another one is focus on achievement and success. So men are typically brought up with, you have to have a certain level and measure of success in order to be seen right in the world, and in order to have a right standing in the world. And then especially in relationships, nowadays we put so much pressure on men in regards to salary. Like, if a man is not making six figures, I don't want him. Well, sis, you may need to rethink that. And not saying that you want somebody that's broke, but also not saying that you can't work to build with someone, So it's just all those things that kind of go on with men that is just like, okay, these are some of their socialization patterns. All right, so socialization patterns of women: emphasis on femininity, right? So we're taught from an early age, or maybe taught from an early age, to be more compassionate, to be soft. Nowadays the terminology is living in our soft era, right? To be feminine, to be soft, to be accommodating. One of the things we hear a lot about women of color, or Black women, I'll say, is that the misconception is that we're not soft, right? That we're not loving, that we're not compassionate, that we come off hard all the time, that we come off with attitudes all the time. And that's simply not the case for all of us, right? So for those of us growing up, some of us may have experienced, the type of homes and families where you kind of had to grow up a little more hardened. And then there are those of us who may have grown up in more, softer homes where the women are taught more femininity. Okay. Another socialization pattern for women is emotional expression. And so women are often encouraged to express their emotions, whereas, like we just talked about, men are not. Okay. And so we tend to receive more praise and validation for being empathetic and for being sensitive and kind and, being seen as nurturing and things like that. Okay. But if you express a high level of strength instead of emotions, then that could be seen too as something that's not, that's not attractive, right? And we get that a lot because we see, or we hear the phrase strong Black woman. And a lot of the times now, Black women are like, I'm not trying to be strong all the time. Where my man? Right? And so now being considered strong and independent is not necessarily the flex that it used to be. Okay. And so that's emotional expression. And then the last one is relationship orientation. And so, women are more encouraged to seek out social support and to express their emotions with their close friends and their close family, their close relationships throughout their lives, whereas men may not be as expressive even with those they consider themselves being close to. Okay, so these are socialization patterns that can actually affect loneliness. Biblical example of this, as we could see in Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And so we see here that God created us with male and with men and women, tendencies, personalities, and just the naturality of who we are as being different, right? As the men being more logical thinkers and women being more emotional thinkers, right? Like God made us different in that way because those are attributes that are in him. Okay. And I know a lot of times we associate like, oh, God is male, so we refer to him as him, but God also has women, female characteristics in him as well. And so we don't want to negate that part of him. And so when it comes to relationships, we need to be able to recognize these patterns within ourselves and within the opposite sex. Okay. So, or if you have a significant other, within your significant other. So you should be aware of how your significant other grew up, as a man. Like, what was his background? How did he grow up? What were the things that he was taught? When it comes to being vulnerable with you, how is he being vulnerable? Because for women, if we notice that someone is not being vulnerable with us, depending on that woman, because I'm not speaking for all women, but depending on that woman, that can affect you. And I see that on movies a lot, and I hear that too, and see that on posts online where, women are like, I'm trying to get him to open up, I'm trying to get him to talk to me, and he won't talk to me. Now that can make you feel lonely in your own relationship. Okay. So when you recognize like, hey, I'm starting to feel a little bit lonely because I don't feel like he's really opening up to me. Now that can be a conversation opener and starter for you and him to be able to dive into what's going on and to come up with a solution that is the best for both of y'all. Right. So that's where the loneliness can come into play with that. And so you want to try to make sure you understand, okay, well, my socialization pattern, I may have been raised up to be more feminine. I know that women are more emotionally expressive than men. And I know that, we value really, really close relationships, maybe a little bit more than men do. So I'm going to let him know how I operate so that he can join in with that, so that I don't feel feelings of loneliness and separation and division. And then you do the same for him. You recognize what patterns are there for him, and then you are able to go ahead and address those with him. So now you are speaking each other's loneliness language, right? Amen. Okay, so a way to overcome this is, I told you all, to go ahead and have those conversations, and then be mindful of your language when you're having those conversations, right? So pay attention to, the types of language that you're using and any of the messages that you are conveying when you are interacting with your significant other, and try to avoid language, and this is in general, and talking with friends too, like try to avoid language that reinforces stereotypes and perpetuates harmful gender norms, okay? Because folks can be real reckless with their mouths today. So make sure that you are using language that promotes respect, that promotes, equality, that one is not higher over the other, but that you are, you respect one another, you love one another, you honor one another's position in each other's lives, and then you can come together and rectify anything that may be wrong in the relationship. So make sure that you understand the socialization patterns, okay, of gender differences that could cause loneliness. All right. Number 2, we're going to talk about communication, because communication and how you communicate can also breed loneliness. All right. So communication, there are obviously different styles of communication between men and women. And as a result of that, it can cause loneliness to creep up in various areas. And so women tend to place, greater emphasis on verbal communication, on emotional expression, and we love to seek out close relationships. A lot of us have not just one best friend, but two, maybe three, maybe five, like we crave that close connection, and we crave being able to confide in others that we, trust about our feelings, right? In contrast, men may be more likely to rely on nonverbal cues, and they're problem solvers. I don't know if you have ever dealt with a man who you just are venting about the day, and he's like, okay, what do I got to do? Who do I got to talk to? Where do I got to go? Like, who do I need to go pull up on in order to rectify this situation? And you're like, no, babe, I'm just asking you to just listen to me. I'm just venting. It's all right. I don't need you to fix it, right? Men can tend to be the problem solvers. They have problem solving approaches, and they're more action oriented than women are sometimes, right? And so because of that, their coping strategies for managing loneliness will look different than a woman's, okay? So let's talk about it. So communication styles of men, they can tend to be more direct, right? So they'll communicate in a more direct and straightforward manner, focusing on making sure that the information that they are conveying or achieving or that they're conveying is achieved in conversation, right? So they're going to be like, what they said is what they said. They may be brief in what they said. A lot of times I've run into men who are not necessarily talkers. And so I would feel sometimes like, I'm not necessarily a talker. And if you're not necessarily a talker, go figure, I'm a podcast host, right? And I'm not a talker for real, but I'm not a talker for real. And they're not a talker. So we just gonna be sitting on the phone in silence. Like we ain't got nothing to say, so, but they tend to be, they tend to have more brevity. They're more brief, and they may be a little bit more efficient in what they say, depending on the maturity of the man. I will caveat that, because sometimes the maturity levels are not there. All right. So depending on the maturity level of the man, they may prefer, to avoid elaboration and not really want to get into all the details. So that's being direct. Another style of theirs is being more assertive. They can adopt a way of expressing their opinions and needs and desires. They would express it more confidently and like I said before, direct. And they may assert themselves in group discussions. They may be a debater. They not gonna back down, and they may take charge in leadership roles. And so I knew somebody like that who was a debater, like naturally, and he always wanted to debate. And it was such a turnoff, because I'm like, if I'm trying to talk to you to get to know you, I don't want to debate you every conversation. Like that's just it's not attractive, and I don't have the energy for it. I want to have just a regular conversation with you, but I don't want every conversation to turn into a debate, so, but some men are like that. Okay. And then problem solving, of course, some men may have a problem-solving mindset, so they want to identify the solutions, they want to make decisions, they want to try to resolve conflict early, they want to be more practical in their solutions, and they want to be like, okay, well, what's the next step, and how do we get out of this? Like, what do we need to do to get out of this, right? So that's some communication styles of men. Of women, expressiveness, like I've talked about before. So, we're more expressive, we may do the head shaking, talking with your hands, cocking your hip to the side while you talking and all the things like that. Like, we may do all of that. Typically, if we're more passionate about a topic, our voice goes up, an octave, to the point people may think we're yelling, but we're not. And that's one of the things I've encountered, where somebody thought that I was yelling just because my voice went up an octave because I was more passionate about what I was talking about. And I'm like, sir, I'm not yelling. I'm just being passionate. Right. So, our range of vocal tones, our facial expressions, any of our gestures, anything like that, the warmth in our smile, anything can cause the expressiveness of a woman. That's our communication, right? Also, empathy and active living. We tend to prioritize active listening. We tend to try to understand other people's perspectives. We want to try to validate others' emotions. Like, hey, sis, I know you're sad, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't be sad. Like we want to validate how we feel. We want to offer support and encouragement. We want to be attentive to subtle cues that people may say in conversation. We may repeat back what somebody said, hey, okay, just to make sure I'm understanding what you said. You said X, Y, and Z. Am I understanding that correctly? Like, we want to make sure that we address everything that we're hearing, right? And then we're more collaborative. So we adopt more of a collaborative communication style. Inclusivity, in groups. We try to build consensus among one another, so we value participation and contribution, shared decision making, things like that, right? So we tend to be more collaborative in our communication, where men may not be, okay? And so a biblical example of this, we're going to tie this into how this could cause loneliness or contribute to loneliness. The biblical example is Proverbs 27:17 that says, iron sharpens iron and one man sharpens another. And so knowing your communication style or the communication style of your significant other can help you to combat feelings of loneliness in a relationship. And so if you know that your significant other is more of a problem solver, then you will know like how to go to them. Like I gave in that example, hey babe, I just want to talk to you about something that happened today. I know that you're a problem solver, but in this moment, I'm asking you not to problem solve and just to really listen to what it is that I'm saying. And then after that, maybe we can kind of have a discussion about it, but I don't want you to necessarily try to solve the problem for me, and he may be like, oh, okay, I understand. Or he may be like, that might be hard for me to do, but I'll do my best. Boom. Then that's an open door, right? And you can go ahead and have that good communication with him. If you're more of a collaborator and that, he's not a long talker, he's more direct, then you can have that long conversation with your girlfriends, but give him the cliff notes when you get home or, give him the cliff notes when you're out to dinner on a date with them. That way you can say, hey, this is what happened at work. I was talking to the girlfriends about it. I told them the whole story, but let me just give you the brief version. Right? And you can give them the brief version, and he can do the same for you, vice versa. If he knows, hey, she's more of a collaborative person, or she's more of a nurturer in conversation, then I will, come out of my norm and I'll give her the whole story so she can give me her true and honest opinion, right? You can work together so that loneliness doesn't creep into your communication styles, okay? And so a way to overcome this is by educating yourself, right? Educate yourself on effective communication, and then develop some strategies individually and together in a relationship that you can put into place so that you will know how to move forward in that, right? And then while you're learning about different communication styles, it'll enhance your understanding of not only how you communicate, but then how your significant others or your friends, your family, how they perceive your communication, and then how you perceive their communication back to you. And so, it's worth educating yourself on communicating and how your communication styles work. I'll say, for example, in my family, I'm a long-winded storyteller. My dad is brief. And so I try to give him the Cliff Notes version sometimes, or sometimes I will, give him the longer version if I know he's really listening and, paying attention to me. But I know and I understand that. When I talk to my mom, she gets the whole hour's worth of the story, right? When I talk to my brother is a family man. So I know that his time is limited and short. I can't keep him for long periods of time. So when he says, hey, Mika, what's going on in your life? I'll say, okay, which one of the things do I want to tell him about right now that I know he has the capacity to hear and kind of respond back to me? And then I will tailor my communication in that way, because I know his time is short, right? So when you know your audience, then you'll know how to communicate with them. The same way that I communicate with my family, I don't communicate with the people that I supervise on my job, right? So I have to communicate with them differently because all of them have different communication styles. So once you learn that, or once I learned their communication styles, now I was able to integrate us as a team, and then And we all now know how to communicate with one another, and we operate very smoothly. So it's important to know your audience, right? Okay, and then lastly, number 3 is social networks. Social networks, we kind of talked about a little before about how social networking and how social networks can play into factors of loneliness. Okay, so women often maintain larger and more diverse social networks than men, and then which of course includes the same, your family, your close friendships, and your community relationships, things like that. And so we'll be more likely to seek emotional support from multiple sources, and engage in a lot of social interaction. So we always trying to go out somewhere. We always trying to hang out. We always trying to talk to somebody. We're always scrolling on social media, TikTok, whatever, to see what other people are doing, right? In order to mitigate feelings of loneliness. So typically social networking becomes the buffer between you and loneliness, because now you're like, I'm starting to feel lonely. Let me hurry up and get out. I'm starting to feel lonely. Let me scroll and see what other people are doing. And, somebody's video may make me laugh and make me happy in the moment, and now takes my mind off of what I'm going through, right? So we use it as a buffer between loneliness. So in contrast, men's social networks may be more focused on task-oriented activities and shared interests with their boys, right? With fewer opportunities for emotional intimacy and support. Very rarely have I seen or heard men get like really emotional and deep and stuff with one another, unless they're doing this, of course, at men's meetings at churches and conferences and stuff like that. But you don't typically see it on a public scale, and especially on a large public scale, right? So if it's happening, I'm praying it is happening. So that would be great, right? So social networks between the two, between men and women, often differ in structure. They often differ in quality. They often differ in function. So all of that can influence our feelings of loneliness. And so when we understand the differences between the two, then it could help in addressing all of the unique challenges that we may face when we're trying to be in relationship with one another. Okay. And so examples of these. So let's talk about network composition. Okay. So for women, typically our network composition, we have more intimate and emotionally supportive relationships. We maintain close-knit and smaller circles, and we rely on family and close friends for emotional support and sharing of our personal issues, right? We gonna talk, okay? We go talk and tell folks what is going on with us, right? Men often have larger networks, but they have weaker ties, okay? So they typically, instead of like good friends, they typically have acquaintances and professional contacts. And then they may engage in social activities and relationships, but they'll be more task-oriented or activity-based. Like what? Sports, right? Men really love sports, okay? So, well, I don't want to say men like I'm saying all, but a lot of men really love sports, okay? So they're going to engage in that type of social activity versus a more intimate activity, okay? And so they may have fewer intimate relationships, and they don't really share that much emotionally. So the correlation to loneliness here for both men and women when it comes to network composition is emotional loneliness. Okay, so for women, despite having a good, strong, supportive network, we can still experience emotional loneliness, especially if we feel like our emotional needs are not fully met within our close relationships. We talked about that before in a previous episode. And then men are more prone to emotional loneliness due to fewer intimate relationships and because they are more reluctant to share their emotions. And so when it comes to loneliness in this regards, in a relationship, we have to make sure that, number one, those that we are in a relationship with have the ability to be vulnerable. So if a man is opening up to you, ladies, don't throw his vulnerability back in his face. Okay? That's not nice, number one. And number two, it could turn them off and make them shut down. And then in the event that y'all don't work out, now the next woman has to claw through all of that you put him through because you threw his vulnerability back in his face. Allow the man to open up and know that he can be vulnerable with you and he can trust you and that you'll be there for him and that you will protect him in that way. Because a lot of times we say, oh, we want the men to protect us, to protect our emotions, to protect how we feel, to protect us physically, to protect us spiritually. Like, we want him to do all the protecting, but we think that we don't have to protect either. I don't understand. Like, we also have to protect how he's feeling. And how we know that as a general composition of a man, they're not going to open up in that way. So we have to create that safe space for them just as much as we want them to create that safe space for us. All right. And then next is social loneliness. And so women may experience social loneliness if they lack a sense of community or if they are lacking a sense of community within their close relationships. All right. And so men typically don't really run into social loneliness per se, unless they're just naturally a loner, because of what we talked about before is they're more activity based, right? So they're always around people. So they're social, but they're less intimate than women. Okay. So, biblical example of this is Psalms 55 verse 22 that says, cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. Meaning that we are, as men and women, we're able to cast our burdens on the Lord. And we can also learn to cast our burdens. We'll cast our burdens on the Lord, but we can also learn to share our burdens with those that we are in relationship with so that we don't continue to feel lonely, right? And so I think that is all I have for today. So let's just make sure that we are aware of the gender differences and how they can show up in loneliness. And if we are in a relationship with someone, make sure that we know and recognize the types of loneliness that could show up in them, the types of loneliness that could show up in us, and then we'll be more equipped and well aware of what to do and how to act and how to respond, and making sure that we are responding in a safe way that allows each set of people to be honest, open, and transparent with one another. All right, well, that is it for today, and I hope that sheds a different light for you on gender differences and how that can affect loneliness and how to overcome them. And so at the end of the day, we have no time to be lonely, but rather we have all the time to live purpose-filled lives full of joy, peace, and love in the Lord. And so thank you for listening to the Confessions of a Christian Single Woman podcast. Remember, ladies, that God loves you immensely. There are no bounds or restrictions to his love. Always seek his face, hear his voice, and live his word out loud. If you have any questions that you would like to hear addressed on the podcast, you can email me at diary@confessionsofaChristianSingleWoman.com. Also, you can follow me at the Confessions of a Christian Single Woman Facebook page and join the private community today. And then also subscribe to our YouTube page. Make sure to like the page, share it, click the bell so you can receive the notifications whenever new episodes come out. Until next time, may the peace of the Lord go with you this week.